In that fraction of a second, when the rusty, oil-stained tire iron soared above the perfectly polished hood of the red convertible, the driver of the huge dump truck was absolutely certain of two things. First, he was the predator here, and second, this day would be the worst in the life of the show-off behind the wheel. New Territories, Hong Kong, May 14th, 1972, noon, when the sun stands at its zenith and turns the narrow mountain serpentine into a scorching frying pan. The heat melts the asphalt, the air trembles with diesel fumes, and hatred on this road flares up faster than a match in gasoline. The situation was classic and hopeless. A massive truck, loaded with gravel, had brazenly blocked the only lane, trapping a tiny Mercedes-Benz 350 SL between a steel bumper and a sheer cliff. You look at the scene and think it's a banal traffic accident. You are mistaken. This is not an accident. This is a hunt. The truck driver didn't just stop. He got out to kill. From the cab, towering over the road like a fortress turret, tumbled a man whom nature created not for dialogue, but for destruction. He was a mountain of muscle and fat, soaked in sweat and malice, weighing nearly 120 kilograms. His face was crimson with rage. Veins on his neck pulsed to the beat of a frantic heart rhythm, and in his hand he gripped a heavy piece of iron, a tire iron that looked like a child's toy in his palm. He walked toward the convertible with a wide stride, and every strike of his boots against the asphalt sounded like a verdict. Why was he so angry? Maybe the heat, maybe envy of the expensive car, or maybe the fact that the driver of the convertible dared to honk at him. For the king of the road, that honk was not a warning, but an insult, a challenge to his dominance that demanded bloody satisfaction. He saw easy prey before him, a low car, an open top, a driver in dark glasses who wasn't even trying to back up. "I'm going to teach you respect now, puppy," the giant growled, and his voice, drowning out the engine noise, echoed off the cliffs. Ask yourself honestly right now, if you were sitting in an open-top car, trapped in a stone sack, watching a psychopath with an iron pipe advancing on you, what would you do? Your instinct would scream, "Run!" But there is nowhere to run. Behind is a cliff. In front is a monster. Would you try to close the doors? Roll up the windows? Pray. Panic is a natural reaction to inevitable pain. But the man behind the wheel of the Mercedes did not panic. He sat relaxed, one hand lying carelessly on the steering wheel, and the other. And this is where the strangest part begins. Instead of looking for a weapon or covering his face with his hands, the driver made a movement that completely breaks the logic of the situation. Remember this moment, this tiny detail that seems insignificant to you now, but in a minute it will become the key to understanding the entire psychology of this clash. The driver slowly, with frightening smoothness, reached his right hand toward the dashboard. His fingers, thin and sinewy, touched the volume knob of the radio. Click. The music playing from the speakers, light 70s jazz, instantly went silent. Why? Did he want to hear his final seconds? Or did he want nothing to distract him from what was about to happen? In the ensuing silence, only the heavy, raspy breathing of the trucker, who had already stepped right up to the driver's door, could be heard. The shadow of his huge figure fell over the cabin, covering the driver completely. "I'll flatten your tin can along with you," the giant bellowed, spraying saliva. He raised the tire iron high above his head, opening up his torso, putting all his mass into a swing intended to turn the windshield and the driver's skull into a single mess. The viewer holds their breath at this moment. We see the swing. We see the defenseless head in dark glasses. We understand that physics is on the side of the heavyweight. A downward strike with a tire iron through an open roof is impossible to block while seated. It is an execution. The truck driver is already celebrating victory in his inflamed brain. He sees fear, he smells blood. But he doesn't see the main thing. He doesn't see that the driver of the Mercedes hasn't pressed himself into the seat. He has leaned slightly forward. His legs, hidden under the dashboard, have already found a fulcrum. muscles, hidden under a fashionable shirt, have tensed like the cables of a suspension bridge before snapping. The trucker thought he had cornered a rat, but he didn't yet know that he had just voluntarily walked into a tiger's cage and locked the door behind him. The tire iron began its downward motion, slicing through the scorching air, and time for the two of them began to flow in different streams. The rusty piece of rebar sliced the air with such a whistle as if it were the scythe of death herself, and at that moment, time on the Hong Kong mountain serpentine split into before and after. Do you expect to hear the sound of shattering glass? Do you cringe in anticipation of the crunch of breaking facial bones? This is a normal reaction, for the laws of physics are inexorable. 120 kilograms of live weight, multiplied by the inertia of an iron rod, leave no chance for a seated person. The trucker put all his proletarian hatred for rich upstarts into this blow. He already felt the phantom recoil in his hand from the metal contacting the skull. But at that point in space, where death was flying at monstrous speed, a glitch in reality occurred. The convertible driver didn't cringe into the seat. He didn't cover his head with his hands. He did what your brain refuses to perceive as a possible action in the confined space of a car. He flew. Ask yourself honestly, how much time do you need to unbuckle a seatbelt, open the door, and run out of a car? 3 seconds? 5? Bruce Lee had a fraction of a second while the tire iron was flying down, and he didn't waste that time on doors. The moment the shadow of the rebar touched his face, Bruce turned into a compressed spring. He used the seat of the Mercedes as a trampoline. It wasn't a human movement. It was the movement of mercury splashing out of a vessel. He shot his body vertically upward, straight through the open roof of the convertible. You think it was a chaotic jump of fear? No. It was the perfect geometry of combat. His feet left the floor mats, his body tucked in the air into a tight ball, and he passed over the hood of his own car, rotating like a gymnast on a horizontal bar. The trucker's tire iron crashed into the void with a terrible roar. More precisely, it grazed the asphalt exactly where the driver's head had been a moment ago, striking a shower of bright, hot sparks that momentarily blinded the aggressor. Inertia is a cruel mistress. The trucker expected to meet the resistance of flesh, but falling into the void, he lost his balance. His massive body was pulled forward following the blow. He stumbled, his heavy boots scuffing the asphalt, trying to find footing, and he nearly collapsed face first onto the scorching hood of the very car he intended to destroy. Where did he go? This thought raced through his head with a delay, like an echo in an empty well. He was sure he had hit. He heard the sound of impact, but it was the sound of metal on stone, not on bone. At this moment, the viewer experiences shock. The picture doesn't add up. The aggressor stands bent over, breathing heavily, his tire iron scraping the road, and there is no victim. The car is empty. The music Bruce turned off a second earlier is silent, and in this silence, only the rushing of blood in the trucker's ears is audible. Where is he? Under the car. Ran into the bushes. But here, the Santa Barbara rule comes into play. When you think you understand the geography of the scene, the screenwriter changes the angle. Bruce didn't run away. He landed, but not where you expected. He performed a full somersault over the hood, and softly, absolutely silently, like a cat jumping off a fence, touched the asphalt exactly 2 meters behind the trucker's back. Look at his shoes. Thin soles, almost like slippers. They made no sound upon contact with the road. Bruce straightened up. He stood relaxed, adjusting the cuff of his shirt, which had bunched up slightly during the flight. There was not a drop of sweat on his face, nor a shadow of fright. He looked at the broad, sweaty back of the giant, who was still trying to regain his balance, and in that look one could read something scarier than anger. There was the curiosity of a scientist observing the behavior of a primitive organism. The trucker finally stopped his fall, bracing his hand against the fender of the Mercedes. He turned around heavily, expecting to see a crushed body or a fleeing coward. His eyes darted around, scanning the space before him. Empty. The cabin is empty. The road is empty. Panic, cold and sticky, began to creep into his heart. He couldn't have evaporated, could he? The trucker gripped the tire iron tighter, his only anchor in this insane situation, and began to slowly turn his head, feeling someone's gaze on his back. You know that feeling? When someone is looking at the back of your head. It is primal. It makes the hair on your arms stand up. The giant turned completely and froze. He saw Bruce, alive, unharmed, standing in a pose of absolute peace, as if he were waiting for a bus, not participating in a fight to the death. How did he end up behind him? It is physically impossible. The driver's brain began to stall. He raised the tire iron again, but now there was no former confidence in his movements. Now it was a gesture of fear. "You... what are you?" he wheezed, and his voice cracked into a falsetto. But Bruce didn't answer with words. He took a step forward. One smooth step that closed the distance to critical, and the trucker's gaze fell on Bruce's hands. They were lowered. They were open. But in them lay such a hidden threat that the iron pipe in the giant's hand suddenly seemed heavy and useless to him, like a straw against a hurricane. The silence hanging over the scorching asphalt was not just an absence of sound. It was a physical, crushing mass in which only the frantic beating of the truck driver's heart could be heard. You think the sight of a man materializing out of thin air made the giant drop his weapon and apologize. You overestimate the rationality of the human brain in a state of affect. Fear, that very sticky, primal horror that paralyzed the trucker's muscles for a second, instantly transformed into the only reaction available to him: blind, destructive aggression. His brain, unable to process the opponent's teleportation, issued a simple order: destroy the anomaly. If this guy didn't die from the first hit, it means he needs to be hit harder. The trucker roared, and the sound was like the screech of metal when brakes fail on a descent. He gripped the tire iron with both hands, turning it into a baseball bat, and began to pivot with his whole body. Have you ever tried to stop a spinning flywheel? The inertia of 120 kilograms, multiplied by the centrifugal force of an iron rod, is capable of breaking a bull's spine. The trucker didn't aim. He simply created a zone of death around himself, a horizontal sweep intended to mow Bruce down like grass. The whistle of the sliced air became piercing, almost shrieking. The viewer at this moment shrinks into their chair. We understand. One can dodge a vertical strike by jumping aside, but how do you escape a horizontal sweep when behind you is a cliff, and in front is the steel bumper of a dump truck? Bruce was in a trap. He had nowhere to retreat. Any step back, and he falls into the abyss. Any step left or right, and he meets the iron. It would seem checkmate, but you forgot who is standing before you. You forgot that Bruce Lee doesn't play by the rules of geometry. He rewrites them. Instead of looking for a path to retreat, Bruce did something that would make any self-defense instructor turn gray in a second. He stepped into the strike, right into the kill zone, to where the speed of the tire iron hadn't yet reached its peak, but where the trucker's body mass was at its maximum. This was the Santa Barbara effect in its purest form. When it seems the hero should run, he attacks. Bruce closed the distance to intimate, entering the giant's personal space so quickly that he didn't even have time to focus his eyes. The tire iron, describing a wide arc, was already flying toward Bruce's ribs, but the trajectory was disrupted. Bruce didn't block it rigidly. A block would have broken his forearm. He placed his hand under the trucker's wrists, softly, almost gently accompanying the enemy's movement. Do you see this? This is not wrestling. This is the physics of levers. Bruce used the trucker's own inertia against him. The giant put all his strength into the blow, expecting to meet the resistance of flesh, but his hands met a sliding vector of force that only accelerated his rotation. And at this point of maximum vulnerability, when the trucker was stretched out in the swing like a string, Bruce laid his palm on the tire iron. He didn't grab it. He simply laid it there. His fingers closed on the cold metal exactly at the moment when the driver's grip weakened due to the twisting of his wrists. It was a trick worthy of Houdini. The viewer blinks, trying to understand what happened. A second ago, the weapon was a threat, and now it became a bridge between two bodies. The trucker completed his monstrous swing. His body, carried by inertia, turned another half circle. He felt a jerk. He felt something leave his hands, but his brain, poisoned by adrenaline, was still broadcasting the image. I am holding a weapon. He stopped, breathing heavily, his chest heaving like blacksmith's bellows. He looked at his hands, ready to deliver the next blow, to finish off, to crush. His fingers were clenched into fists. The muscles of his forearms were tense to a stone-like state. He was ready to kill. But something was missing. Weight. Where did the weight go? He blinked, shaking sweat from his eyelashes, and looked down. His fists were clutching emptiness. Air. Nothing. Panic, cold, and sharp as a needle, pierced the back of his head. Where did the tire iron go? Did it fly into the abyss? Did it fall? He began to look around feverishly, and his gaze landed on the figure of Bruce, who was standing just half a meter away from him. Bruce did not take a fighting stance. He stood absolutely straight, feet shoulder-width apart, breathing even, almost inaudible. And in his right hand, casually, like a conductor's baton, he held that very rusty tire iron. He weighed it in his palm, slightly tossing it up, and every time the metal slapped against his skin, that sound hit the trucker's nerves harder than a slap in the face. How? When? This is impossible. The driver backed away. He took a step back, and his heel hit the bumper of his own truck. The trap snapped shut. The hunter turned into the prey. But what will Bruce do with this weapon? Strike? Take revenge for the attempted murder? In Bruce's eyes there was no anger. There was the boredom of a man who had been interrupted from listening to his favorite song. And this boredom was more frightening than any rage. Bruce slowly raised the tire iron, pointing its rusty, jagged end straight at the giant's Adam's apple. The cold, rough metal of the tire iron touched the trucker's sweaty neck, and this contact was like an electric discharge that instantly shut down all higher functions of his brain, leaving only the ancient reptilian stem responsible for terror to work. You think a 100-kilogram man, used to solving problems with his fists, tried to knock the weapon away? You expect him to jerk back or try to knee him in the groin? That would be logical in a fight, but what was happening on the scorching asphalt was no longer a fight. It was a vivisection of the soul. The rusty end of the iron pipe rested exactly against the giant's Adam's apple, pressing slightly on the cartilage, just enough to make swallowing difficult, but not to cut off the air completely. The trucker froze. His eyes, a second ago filled with blood and fury, now dilated to the size of saucers, and in them splashed the understanding of his own mortality. He saw his reflection in Bruce Lee's dark glasses, a distorted, pathetic face, twisted with fear, a man who suddenly realized he was not a predator, but merely a piece of soft meat on a cutting board. At that moment, that very visual silence I told you about descended upon the mountain serpentine. The world turned off the sound, the noise of the wind vanished, the hum of the truck engine idling dissolved into a vacuum. One could only hear a drop of sweat break loose from the trucker's temple and smash with a quiet slap against his oil-stained undershirt. Do you hear that slap? It is the sound of an ego crashing. Bruce didn't utter a word of threat. He didn't scream, "I'll kill you," as the driver had done a minute ago. Bruce simply stood there, holding the heavy tire iron with one hand, absolutely relaxed, as if it were not a deadly bludgeon, but a calligraphy pen. And this lightness was more terrifying than any scream. If he holds it so lightly, it means he can pierce the throat without the slightest effort. The driver tried to swallow, but his Adam's apple pressed against the iron. Kuh. The sound got stuck in his throat. He realized his life now hung not by a thread, but on the tip of his own tire iron, which he had so recklessly brought to this meeting. Ask yourself honestly, what would you be thinking about in this second? About your family? About an unpaid loan? The driver thought only of one thing. Why isn't he striking? The unknown is the most terrible torture. Bruce tilted his head slightly, studying the giant's face with the same dispassionate interest with which an entomologist examines a beetle pinned to a board. "Metal is hard," Bruce finally said. His voice was quiet even, without a single note of tension, and this calm tone cut through the silence like a scalpel. "And flesh. Flesh is soft. You were so confident in the power of iron that you forgot about the fragility of the one holding it." Bruce pressed slightly on the tire iron. The trucker cried out, not from pain, but from the expectation of pain. He backed away, but his back was pressed against the scorching radiator grill of his own truck. The trap had snapped shut completely. The heat of the engine burned his back. The cold of the metal chilled his throat. He was pinned between two machines he considered his strength, and a man who turned out to be a force of nature. And then happens the thing that breaks the aggressor's psyche completely. The Santa Barbara effect. You wait for a resolution through violence, but Bruce removes the tire iron from the throat. He lowers it, but he doesn't drop it. He begins to slowly rotate the heavy rod in his fingers. Whoosh, whoosh. The iron dances in his hand, turning into a blurred spot. The driver looks at this mesmerizing rotation, and his brain refuses to believe his eyes. How? How can one control a piece of rebar like that? He realizes that if Bruce wanted to, he would already be dead 3 times over. This realization hits harder than a fist. "Are you sure you want to check what is stronger, your head or your tool?" Bruce asks, abruptly stopping the rotation. The sharp end of the tire iron freezes a centimeter from the driver's nose bridge. That was the last straw. The nervous system of the king of the road could not withstand the overload. The adrenaline driving him into battle turned into a toxin of panic. The giant's legs gave way. He made a sound resembling the whimper of a beaten dog and covered his face with his hands, expecting a blow. But no blow followed. Instead, Bruce took a step back, opening a passage. This gesture was scarier than a blow. It was contempt. "Go away," he tossed out, turning away. The driver, unable to believe his luck, peeled himself off the radiator grill. He stumbled over his own feet, nearly falling, and staggering like a drunk, rushed not toward Bruce, not toward the tire iron, but toward the saving door of his cab. He scrambled up the steps of the dump truck, tearing his fingernails, gasping for air, just to be inside, behind glass, far away from this demon in dark glasses. He slammed the door and clicked the lock. Clack! That sound of the bolt echoed through the whole valley. The giant, who 5 minutes ago promised to flatten the convertible, now sat pressed into the seat, trying with trembling hands to find the ignition key, praying to all gods that the engine would start on the first try. And Bruce? He remained standing on the road, holding a trophy in his hand that he didn't need, but which became the symbol of his absolute victory over chaos. The roar of the diesel engine, working at the limit of its capabilities, tore apart the silence of the mountain gorge as the huge dump truck tore off with the grace of a frightened elephant. The truck's wheels spun on the scorching asphalt, spitting out clouds of black, acrid smoke and fine gravel that drummed like buckshot against the lacquered hood of the red Mercedes. You think the driver looked back? You suppose there was a drop of that bravado left in him with which he stepped onto the road 5 minutes ago? No, he floored the gas pedal, risking falling into the abyss at every turn of the serpentine, just to increase the distance between himself and the man in dark glasses. His flight was not just a retreat, it was a panic evacuation from a reality he couldn't understand. Bruce Lee remained standing in a cloud of dust, absolutely motionless, like a lighthouse amidst a storm, and in his right hand still rested that very rusty tire iron, a trophy he didn't need, but which became a symbol of the total domination of spirit over matter. At that moment, when the rumble of the truck began to fade around the bend. A strange, almost ringing silence fell upon the road. Bruce looked at the piece of iron in his hand. He weighed it, feeling the cold heaviness of aggression that this object had absorbed from its owner. You expect him to keep it as a souvenir, or maybe, in a rush of adrenaline, hurl it after the fleeing enemy. Bruce did what finally closed the gestalt of this scene. He carelessly unclenched his fingers. Clang. The tire iron fell onto the asphalt. It was the sound of garbage being thrown away as useless. He stepped over it, not dignifying it with even a glance, and headed toward his car. His gait was light, springy. Not a single muscle betrayed the fact that a second ago he had performed an acrobatic stunt worthy of Olympic gold. He walked up to the driver's door, opened it, and slid into the leather seat, which still held the warmth of his body. And here comes that very intellectual orgasm, the moment when all the threads of the story weave into a single knot. Do you remember that detail at the very beginning? That tiny gesture that seemed insignificant? Bruce turned off the music before the fight. Now, sitting in silence, he slowly reached his hand toward the dashboard. His fingers found the ribbed volume knob. Click. The cabin instantly filled with the soft, syncopated rhythms of jazz. The melody continued exactly from the note where it was interrupted. Do you understand the meaning of this action? For Bruce, this fight was not an event. It was just a pause, a commercial break in the movie of his life. He didn't let chaos penetrate inside him. He simply put his life on pause, eliminated the interference, and pressed play. The rhythm of his heart didn't even skip a beat from the music. He put it in gear, and the red convertible smoothly moved off, driving around the tire iron lying on the road, leaving behind the smell of burnt rubber and the destroyed ego of the king of the road. But what became of the driver? You think he got to the nearest bar and drowned his fear in whiskey, bragging about how he scared a Chinese guy? Reality is far more interesting. Legend has it that this man never picked up a weapon again. He quit the transport company a week later. In the port taverns of Hong Kong, a tale circulated for years about a crazy trucker who told everyone willing to listen that one day on a pass in the New Territories, he was attacked by a wind demon. He swore that the man disappeared before his eyes and appeared behind his back, passing through metal. He never found out it was Bruce Lee. For him, it remained a mystical experience, an encounter with something beyond, which forever killed his desire to be rude on the road. Bruce didn't just defeat his body, he rewired his brain, turning the aggressor into a devout coward. And now, as the final credits of this story run before your eyes, I want to leave you with a question that will itch in your brain. We admire Bruce's composure, his style, his mercy. But let's look at the situation cynically. He let a man go who, 5 minutes ago, was ready to kill him with a tire iron. This driver drove away in a state of affect, operating a multi-ton machine. He could have crashed into someone else around the bend. Was Bruce's action higher wisdom, a demonstration that the best fight is the one that ended without blood? Or was it the criminal negligence of a genius who, enjoying his superiority, allowed a dangerous psychopath to return to the road? Don't try to be correct. Go down to the comments and write your verdict, sage or egoist. And one more detail for those who really know how to listen. I said Bruce turned on jazz. What track do you think could have been playing at that moment to perfectly underscore the absurdity of what was happening? Write the name of the track that, in your opinion, became the soundtrack to this victory over chaos. I will pin the most atmospheric option at the top. The discussion starts right now.